It's funny how most people spend their entire lives treating reading as something ordinary, almost boring, as if it were nothing more than a basic skill everyone learns in school. Yet hidden behind this simple act is one of the most powerful tools the mind can ever experience. And the strangest part is that this transformation happens quietly, without drama, without alerting you in any obvious way. While you think you're just moving through lines of text, your brain is busy rewiring itself, strengthening internal circuits, sharpening old pathways, and building new ones that completely reshape how you think, interpret, and respond to the world around you. It sounds exaggerated at first, but the truth is that reading alters the architecture of your mind in ways far deeper than most people realize. Picture someone picking up a book with the intention of killing time. They're not planning to become smarter. They're not expecting anything extraordinary. They're just reading because it's there. Yet the moment their eyes begin following the sentences, multiple regions of the brain wake up at the same time. Areas responsible for language processing start firing. Memory systems begin sorting and organizing information. Logical reasoning networks activate, and creativity centers light up as new images form in the imagination. These systems start communicating with each other in a coordinated rhythm, building connections that didn't exist minutes earlier. All of this happens silently, without the reader feeling any kind of internal fireworks, but the brain notices, and the brain changes. The irony here is priceless. People say reading is simple, but no other daily action remodels the brain with such precision. And when you bring Richard Feynman into the conversation, this irony becomes even more delightful. Feynman always had a playful relationship with knowledge. He treated ideas the way some people treat puzzles or magic tricks. To him, reading wasn't an obligation or a task. It was an opportunity to explore thoughts like a curious child taking apart a toy just to see what's inside. His approach wasn't rigid or academic. It was alive, humorous, experimental. And that's exactly why he could turn the most complicated concepts into something easy to understand. Because he didn't approach reading with pressure. He approached it with curiosity. And that's the spirit behind this video, showing that reading isn't simply gathering information. It's not memorizing lines, it's not a school chore. It's a biological, emotional, intellectual event happening inside your head. Every single time you open a book, your brain adapts. Every page changes you a little. Every idea leaves a trace that forces your mind to reorganize itself. That's why people who read regularly develop sharper thinking, clearer communication, deeper reasoning, and a much stronger ability to connect ideas that seem unrelated at first glance. What's even more incredible is that this transformation doesn't require special talent, expensive tools, or complicated training. Anyone can trigger it. A teenager reading a novel on the bus, an adult revisiting a childhood classic, an elderly person exploring a topic they've never studied before. Reading works for all ages, all backgrounds, all levels of knowledge. It doesn't ask for permission. It simply begins reshaping your neural patterns the moment you engage with it. And the more you do it, the more profound the transformation becomes. This is why saying reading changes your life isn't motivational fluff. It's literal neuroscience. It's a biological truth. Through reading, you strengthen your ability to analyze situations, interpret information, connect dots, question assumptions, and refine your decision-making. You build intellectual flexibility, the ability to switch perspectives, evaluate ideas with clarity, and rethink your conclusions without fear. Feynman embodied this skill so naturally that people often assumed he was just gifted. But the truth is that he trained his mind constantly, especially through reading. He read to challenge himself, to laugh at ideas, to question the obvious, to break mental patterns. He wasn't reading to sound smart. He was reading to play with knowledge. And that playful attitude is precisely what makes reading such a powerful mental exercise. When you approach books with curiosity instead of obligation, your brain learns faster, absorbs more, and builds stronger neural pathways. So if anyone ever wondered why reading matters, here's the simplest and most honest answer. Because it quietly rewires your brain. Because it transforms you without asking for effort. Because it gives you a sharper mind even when you think you're just turning pages. If that surprises you, good. Because this video is going to show you exactly how that transformation works. When you open a book, it doesn't look like anything special is happening. You're sitting still, your eyes are moving back and forth, and the world around you seems unchanged. But inside your head, an entire storm of activity begins, a complex sequence of events that scientists often compare to a symphony. Reading is one of the very few activities capable of activating multiple neural systems at the same time, and they all move in perfect coordination, as if responding to an orchestra conductor that no one can see. It might feel ordinary on the outside, but internally it's one of the most intense cognitive workouts the mind can perform. The moment your eyes land on the first sentence, your visual cortex starts decoding shapes, lines, and patterns. Letters aren't meaningful on their own. Your brain has learned, over years, to interpret these symbols instantly. This decoding happens so fast that you don't even notice how much processing is required. While that occurs, language areas step in, identifying words, understanding structure, and giving sense to every phrase. These regions, mainly located in the left hemisphere, begin to exchange information rapidly, assembling meaning from what initially looked like nothing more than ink on a page. As soon as meaning forms, another set of systems wakes up: memory networks. They help you recall what you already know about the subject, relate new information to past experiences, compare what you're reading to old knowledge, and store fresh ideas. This combination of activation and retrieval creates an ongoing loop that slowly reshapes your neural wiring. Scientists describe this process as neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change based on what you learn. Every time you read, you stimulate this mechanism, and it adapts slightly, like a muscle reacting to exercise. But reading doesn't stop at logic and memory. It also triggers imagination. When a text describes a place, a person, a situation, or an idea, the brain automatically starts forming images. Even when the content is abstract, your mind tries to build some mental representation, using a mix of visual, emotional, and associative cues. The remarkable part is that the brain uses the same areas for imagining as it does for perceiving reality. In other words, reading makes your mind simulate experiences almost as if you were living them. This is one of the reasons reading enhances creativity so strongly. It forces your brain to generate worlds from nothing but words. At the same time, reasoning networks begin to operate. They evaluate the information, compare details, detect contradictions, and search for patterns. This analytical process happens quietly, almost automatically, especially when the content is interesting or surprising. You might not notice, but your brain constantly asks itself, does this make sense? How does this connect to what I know? What does this imply? That questioning mechanism is part of what increases intelligence over time. Reading teaches your brain to think more deeply and more clearly without you making any conscious effort. Another fascinating aspect is the emotional response triggered by reading. When the text describes fear, joy, confusion, or tension, the regions responsible for emotional processing light up as if you were experiencing those feelings firsthand. This emotional involvement strengthens memory, increases empathy, and improves your ability to understand other perspectives. People who read regularly develop stronger emotional awareness because their brains frequently simulate the inner worlds of others. All these systems, vision, language, memory, imagination, reasoning, emotion, work together in a synchronized rhythm that no other daily activity replicates in the same way. Watching videos stimulates some of these areas. Listening to music activates others. Having a conversation engages a few, but reading activates them all at once, repeatedly, consistently, and with long-term impact. The more frequently you read, the stronger these neural connections become. It's like carving pathways in the brain. Each reading session deepens them. Over time, processing becomes faster, comprehension becomes easier, and thinking becomes clearer. What once felt complex begins to feel natural. This is why people who read consistently tend to absorb new information quickly and adapt to new challenges with much more agility. What makes this even more extraordinary is that these internal transformations do not require conscious awareness. You don't need to read with specific techniques or advanced strategies. Simply engaging with text already activates the mechanisms responsible for brain development. The process is automatic, built into the biology of human cognition. Reading is the switch that turns it on. So the next time you open a book, remember, you're not doing something simple. You're participating in one of the most intricate and profound operations your mind can perform. You're shaping circuits, refining thinking, and expanding the architecture of your intelligence, all through an act that looks humble but is anything but. Richard Feynman had a way of looking at the world that made complex ideas feel like everyday conversations. He never approached knowledge as something sacred or untouchable. He treated it like clay, something you mold, twist, test, stretch, and reshape until you truly understand it. And for him, reading wasn't a ritual of absorbing information. It was an entry point to this playful relationship with ideas. While most people read to collect facts, Feynman read to provoke thoughts, to challenge assumptions, and to uncover hidden mechanisms behind the simplest things. What made his approach unique was the way he interacted with written information. He didn't just follow the sentences passively. He questioned every detail, argued with the text, imagined alternate explanations, and rewrote concepts in his mind until they made perfect sense. Reading, for him, was not about memorizing. It was about thinking. He understood that the real power of reading came from the way it forces the mind to break information apart and reassemble it in a way that becomes personally meaningful. Feynman liked to say that when you truly understand something, you can explain it to a child. That statement reveals exactly how he used reading, not as a final product, but as raw material. When he encountered a new idea in a book or article, his first instinct was not to accept it, but to challenge it. He would ask himself whether the explanation was clear, whether it matched reality, whether it aligned with what he already knew, and whether he could express it in a simpler way. This process transformed reading into a mental laboratory where ideas were constantly being tested, disproved, rebuilt, and refined. Most people read expecting the text to do all the work. Feynman did the opposite. He did the work. He used reading as a spark, not the final flame, and that's why his understanding of the world was so sharp. He didn't rely on the authority of the author. He relied on the quality of his own reasoning. He approached every paragraph with curiosity instead of passivity. This is one of the reasons he became one of the greatest scientific thinkers of the 20th century. Another aspect that makes his relationship with reading so powerful is the way he embraced confusion. For many people, confusion is uncomfortable. It feels like failure. But for Feynman, confusion was a signal that he was about to learn something important. When he read something that didn't make sense, he didn't move on. He stopped. He explored. He asked new questions. He broke the idea into smaller parts until the confusion disappeared. Reading gave him endless opportunities to encounter these mental challenges, and he welcomed them every time. This attitude is deeply connected to intelligence. Truly intelligent people are not the ones who know everything. They are the ones who investigate when something doesn't fit. Reading expands intelligence not because it fills the brain with information, but because it confronts the mind with puzzles. Each paragraph demands analysis, interpretation, and decision-making. Feynman understood this instinctively, and he used reading to keep his thinking flexible and sharp. He also saw reading as a way to escape the limits of personal experience. No one can live every situation or learn every skill firsthand. But through reading, he could explore worlds he never visited, ideas he never considered, and perspectives he would never naturally encounter. This exposure broadened his understanding of people, science, history, behavior, and everything in between. He often said that curiosity was the engine of discovery, and reading was one of the greatest fuels for that curiosity. Another important point is the role reading played in his creativity. Feynman was not only brilliant in logic, he was inventive. He loved imagination. Reading offered him an endless supply of unusual questions, strange observations, unexpected details, and thought-provoking contradictions. These fragments of information became sparks for the creative leaps that defined his work. He didn't separate imagination from knowledge, he combined them. Reading gave him both, structure and inspiration, and he transformed that mixture into new ideas. Feynman's relationship with reading shows that intelligence is not something static or predetermined. It is something shaped by habits, and one of the most powerful habits is engaging with text actively, curiously, and fearlessly. He used reading to train his mind the same way athletes train their bodies, consistently, energetically, deliberately. The more he read, the more he questioned. The more he questioned, the more he understood. The more he understood, the more brilliant he became. And that's the lesson hidden behind his attitude. Reading isn't powerful because books contain information. Reading is powerful because the act of reading turns your mind into a machine that never stops refining itself. Feynman embraced this fully, and that's why reading became one of his greatest tools for thinking. Most people assume intelligence grows through big achievements, dramatic breakthroughs, or moments of sudden clarity. But in reality, intelligence is shaped in the quiet, unnoticed routines you repeat every day. And reading is one of the most powerful among them. It doesn't announce its impact, it doesn't make noise, and it doesn't give you immediate feedback. Instead, it works slowly and silently, layer by layer, building cognitive strength in ways that are easy to overlook. Yet when you step back and examine the long-term effects, the transformation is impossible to ignore. One of the most influential changes reading creates is the expansion of mental flexibility. Every time you read something new, your brain must learn to adjust to a different voice, rhythm, structure, and perspective. Your mind shifts between interpretations, evaluates meanings, resolves ambiguities, and adapts to new patterns of thought. This constant adjustment is like stretching a mental muscle. The more it stretches, the easier it becomes to navigate complex ideas with ease and confidence. Another subtle transformation occurs in the speed of processing information. Readers naturally develop quicker comprehension because their brains are accustomed to decoding complex input at a fast pace. With practice, this decoding becomes automatic, freeing mental resources for deeper reasoning. Over time, readers start understanding arguments faster, identifying key points more efficiently, and recognizing logical structures without effort. These abilities accumulate gradually, and because the growth is so smooth, people don't realize how much sharper they've become until they compare themselves to someone who rarely reads. Reading also strengthens pattern recognition. When you expose your mind to countless explanations, stories, analogies, and frameworks, you begin to detect similarities between ideas that seem unrelated at first glance. This is one of the core features of high intelligence, seeing connections others miss. Whether the text is scientific, philosophical, historical, or fictional, each one provides a new set of patterns that your brain stores and organizes. Later, when you encounter a new problem, you unconsciously draw from this internal library, allowing you to see solutions that feel obvious to you but invisible to others. Another aspect that reading quietly improves is focus. The modern world constantly trains our minds to shift attention rapidly. Notifications, short videos, multitasking, endless scrolling. Reading goes in the opposite direction. It teaches the brain to sustain attention for longer periods. Staying engaged with a text requires concentration, and that skill develops with practice. Over time, readers become better at maintaining mental discipline, ignoring distractions, and staying absorbed in a single task. This ability doesn't look dramatic, but it dramatically increases productivity, comprehension, and decision-making in everyday life. Reading also influences emotional intelligence, but in a very indirect way. When you read, you temporarily inhabit someone else's thoughts, feelings, and worldview. You experience situations you never lived through, understand struggles you never faced, and see reasoning that differs from your own. This repeated exposure broadens your capacity for empathy. It improves your ability to interpret emotional cues, understand motivations, and anticipate reactions. These adjustments don't feel like intellectual growth at first, but they make your thinking far more nuanced. Another hidden benefit is the strengthening of memory. Every time you read, your brain must store characters, facts, relationships, timelines, or logical structures. It must maintain a mental map of the text, update it constantly, and retrieve information repeatedly. This process reinforces the neurological circuits responsible for recall. Over months and years, readers develop stronger working memory and long-term storage, contributing directly to better reasoning and problem-solving. Perhaps the most underestimated effect of reading is the way it enhances clarity of thought. When you engage with text regularly, you learn to recognize well-constructed arguments and distinguish them from weak ones. You start noticing inconsistencies, missing evidence, and flawed assumptions. This internal refinement improves your ability to think clearly, express yourself effectively, and avoid confusion. You begin to reason with structure instead of chaos, and that structure becomes part of your daily life. The cumulative effect of all these subtle transformations is profound. None of them happen in a single day, but each reading session adds a small improvement, a sharper thought here, a new perspective there, a stronger connection somewhere else. The mind evolves gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day you look back and realize that reading has changed, not just what you know, but how you think. And this is the real secret. Intelligence isn't just the accumulation of information, it's the refinement of mental processes. Reading is one of the few activities that enhances those processes naturally, without pressure, without force, and without needing special techniques. It shapes intelligence from the inside out, quietly and consistently. Pause. Say okay when you want me to continue with Section 5, 700 words. Você disse, okay. There is a quiet capacity that highly perceptive individuals use without pointing it out, a kind of mental flexibility that works beneath the surface while everything around them seems chaotic. This ability shapes their decisions, sharpens their reasoning, and refines the way they understand the world. Although it feels subtle, it acts as a powerful internal compass. Richard Feynman often demonstrated this trait in the simplest moments, showing that brilliance does not need ornament, it needs clarity. This skill is the art of rethinking, not revisiting ideas out of insecurity, but out of commitment to accuracy. Many people cling to their first conclusion as if changing direction would diminish their credibility. For Feynman, it was the opposite. Adjusting a viewpoint represented strength, not weakness. It showed honesty toward reality, not attachment to ego. Those with sharp intellect operate the same way. They allow mental movement instead of rigid certainty. It happens in small habits. They pause when something doesn't fit quite right. They question their own assumptions even when nobody else notices inconsistencies. They revise details, not through fear of being wrong, but out of a genuine desire to understand. This tendency quietly separates them from others. While many chase validation, they chase accuracy. While others defend positions, they refine them. This sensitivity toward internal correction also helps them avoid traps that capture most people. Instead of following patterns blindly, they detect flaws in the structure of explanations. They sense when a claim sounds right but lacks substance. They pick up on gaps that others overlook because they're not satisfied with smooth surfaces. They want solid foundations. This is not skepticism for the sake of conflict. It is the natural behavior of a mind that values truth over comfort. Feynman embodied this through humor and playfulness. He treated ideas like objects to be rotated, stretched, inspected from unexpected angles. He showed that thinking does not need to be heavy to be profound. He stripped concepts down to their essentials, refusing to let complicated words substitute for clear meaning. People with advanced cognitive awareness tend to do this as well, turning complex notions into simple explanations that make sense even to someone with no background at all. This internal posture brings another advantage: adaptability. Because they don't mold their identity around fixed statements, they shift when new evidence appears. While others resist change to protect pride, they adjust direction instantly if it improves their understanding. They are not attached to being right. They are attached to learning. That distinction, though subtle, is one of the greatest markers of elevated intellect. This practice also expands emotional steadiness. When your thinking is flexible, frustration decreases. Failures turn into data. Obstacles turn into signals. Instead of interpreting mistakes as proof of incompetence, they interpret them as opportunities to refine their method. The world becomes less threatening because everything contributes to growth instead of damaging their self-image. This mindset builds resilience that others mistake for natural confidence, when in truth it is trained through consistent self-correction. People observing them from a distance often assume they have supernatural clarity. In reality, nothing magical is happening. They simply refuse to freeze their understanding at the first version of any thought. They treat their mind like an instrument that requires tuning, not a monument that must stay untouched. Each day brings adjustments, small, consistent, intentional. Over time, this creates a level of precision that appears extraordinary. Feynman's message was simple: do not fool yourself, because you are the easiest person to fool. Those who embrace this advice cultivate a sharper internal radar. They detect their own biases, emotional interference, and flawed shortcuts long before these things distort their judgment. This vigilance doesn't produce anxiety. It produces clarity. It keeps them aligned with reality instead of illusions. In the end, this ability forms the backbone of effective thinking. It elevates decisions, strengthens reasoning, and expands understanding. It is the quiet practice that distinguishes minds that grow from minds that stagnate. And although many overlook it, those who master it unlock a level of insight that transforms the way they learn, act, and interpret the world. There's a moment in every reader's life when something seemingly insignificant happens. You close a book, you look around, and suddenly the world feels slightly altered. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, but something inside you is rearranged. It's subtle, yet powerful, like a quiet shift in the earth beneath your feet. This section is about that transformation, the one that Richard Feynman spent years demonstrating through his curiosity-driven approach to understanding reality. And here's the surprising truth. Reading trains your brain to think differently because it teaches you to question everything you see, everything you hear, and everything you assume. It introduces friction, which is the birthplace of intelligence. Most people think reading is passive, but the opposite is true. Every line forces your brain to juggle ideas, predictions, memories, and interpretations. While your eyes glide over letters, your mind is running simulations, comparing concepts, filtering information, discarding shortcuts, and building new mental models. That constant mental rewiring makes you more flexible and sharper. It's the same cognitive power Feynman relied on when breaking down complex systems into simpler pieces. Reading trains that same skill, page after page, chapter after chapter. And here is where everything becomes even more interesting. Reading doesn't just feed your brain, it stretches it. It exposes you to unfamiliar voices, unusual logic, contradictory arguments, and unexpected conclusions. Every time your mind faces a new perspective, it must expand to accommodate it. That expansion becomes intelligence, not the memorize facts type, but the kind that turns you into someone who thinks independently, questions confidently, and understands deeply. Feynman believed that knowledge only becomes real when you can explain it simply. Reading gives you the raw material that later becomes clarity. Think about a moment when you encountered a sentence that felt like someone turning on a flashlight in a dark room. A sentence that rearranged your understanding or shattered something you believed was unshakable. That moment isn't accidental. It's neural engineering. Your brain is forming new pathways as if renovating itself from the inside. Reading doesn't just inform, it redesigns. And the more you expose yourself to different authors, different structures, different rhythm, the more diverse your mental wiring becomes. Diversity of thought becomes the foundation of creativity, innovation, and better decision-making. But here's the twist that many overlook. Reading also strengthens your ability to stay with an idea for longer than a few seconds. In a world that constantly interrupts you with notifications, ads, and quick content, reading is resistance. It forces your brain to hold attention, to travel through a concept without rushing to the end, to stay with ambiguity without panic. This endurance becomes mental stamina. Stamina is a crucial component of intelligence because deep understanding requires time, focus, and the willingness to explore complexity without running away. Feynman consistently warned about the illusion of knowing, that quick familiarity we feel when we skim, scroll, or glance at information. He insisted that real understanding requires time. Reading gives you that time. It slows you down, not because you're slow, but because depth requires deliberate engagement. When your brain gets used to staying longer with ideas, it becomes better at solving problems, making connections, and identifying subtle patterns. This is the architecture of true intelligence. Another overlooked advantage of reading is emotional calibration. Each story, argument, memory, or explanation awakens a different internal response. You develop empathy, patience, tolerance for frustration, and the ability to anticipate outcomes. Intelligence isn't just logic, it's emotional precision. Reading strengthens that precision by exposing you to characters, conflicts, tension, resolution, and uncertainty. Your mind becomes more adaptable, more balanced, more resilient. Feynman himself believed curiosity and emotional openness were crucial for scientific discovery. Reading cultivates the same traits effortlessly. And then comes the greatest benefit of all. Reading helps you think with your own mind, not with borrowed opinions, not with automatic beliefs, not with programmed assumptions. When you read, you learn to evaluate arguments, compare interpretations, question motives, and search for evidence. You become someone who doesn't accept answers easily, but also doesn't reject ideas blindly. That equilibrium, That space between skepticism and openness is the mark of someone truly intelligent. So the next time you pick up a book and feel that quiet shift inside you, remember this: your brain is working harder than you realize. It's bending, stretching, reorganizing itself. Every paragraph becomes a tiny spark of transformation. Each spark builds a richer mind. That's the legacy behind Feynman's thinking. Intelligence is something you build, not something you're born with. And reading is one of the most powerful tools for building it. If this insight expanded something inside you, drop a comment sharing the last book that rewired your thinking. Your answer might light up someone else's mind.